Hello, hello. I hope everybody's doing all right today. Um, I'm just coming on here to do this live because a lot has happened since the weekend, and that goes for international affairs as it does things that have occurred here at home. Now, I wanted to discuss a few things. I wanted to discuss briefly what's been going on in the proxy nation, the Western proxy over there in Eastern Europe. And I also wanted to discuss this alleged this alleged protest, this protest going on in China. Now, I know that a lot of things are being said about a lot of things, and I've also heard something fairly absurd today. I was listening to a certain person's video. I'm not going to say their name because I don't like to name drop, but they also said something really kooky about China that isn't true. Um, a lot of people are saying a lot of things, and they're not correct. So I'm going to discuss what I've noticed, and I'm going to briefly maybe discuss some other things too, because we are edging towards disaster, very much so, very much so. Now, what's going on over there in Eastern Europe, there's certainly a small part of it because of what it has done to our collective armed forces in the West, draining them of their resources, of course, as I've said many times over. But right now, as I'm speaking, there are some pretty intense battles raging in the eastern part of that nation. And if you recall what I said in some of my past work, not all that long ago, that I discussed them doing their pinning movements to entrap the forces of the proxy so that they could carry out their massive scale invasion. And I'm now hear me out. A lot of things have happened over the weekend, a lot of indicators that it's about to get started. And I mean the full-scale invasion, not this little, tiny, limited incursion that's been going on, but I mean the full-scale invasion whereby Russian forces sweep down from the north and basically finish that whole land off. It is about to get started. They are right now, not only have they been hitting the grid over in that country, but they've also been hitting their communications. Their satellite communications towers is a big part of it, but they've also been hitting their electronic communications. They've been hitting the grid, of course, for a little while now, but most of that country is suffering blackouts from their grid being hit directly. So they've now been going after their military communications, both satellite and electronic. They've been hitting communications towers. They've been hitting dishes. They've been hitting all types of things. The Russians have. So that is what you do when you're about to invade somebody. You destroy their communications. You destroy their grid. You take out their power, so to speak. You eliminate all that stuff. Just like I've shown in my work with the invasion stuff. Every last single solitary documentary or story that I typed out or the audiobook, it always has everything beginning with the grid and telecom and military communications all being taken down. And that is exactly what's been going on since this weekend over there in that proxy nation. Also, the battles have flared up in the eastern part of that nation again. Not just the whole Kherson thing, but also Bakhmut and other areas as well. Kharkov, all of it. The reason those are heating up is because where the limited incursion forces have been fighting all these months, they're now going to act as the pinning force to pin down the Western proxy forces in the East. As I've said before several times, they are getting ready to finish them off. They're trying to get them to commit as many resources as they can in the eastern part of that country. They're trying to get them to commit as much as they can in the eastern part of that country before they finish it off. So, and I'm talking about with their sweep down from the north. Now, if you are that nation, the proxy nation, they have a lot of defensible territory from outsiders. Now, what I'm saying is that, as I've explained before, Ukraine has mountains. They have the Carpathian Mountains in the southwest, not the little part that goes and touches Romania. I'm talking about the part where Poland and Hungary are. It's north, the part that's to the northwest of Moldova. I'm talking about that part, the far westernmost part of that country. They have the Carpathian Mountains, and then in the north, they've been blessed with the marshes up there, the Pripyat marshes, because the Pripyat marshes are very, very difficult to cross with any type of substantial, heavy armored forces, meaning like mechanized infantry or tank forces and like, because you have to cross where there are well-engineered roads that can support those types of heavy vehicles, and lots of them. So all the causeways, the well-engineered roads that go through the Pripyat marshes, those are easier to defend because it forces your enemy invader that's coming down from Belarus to be basically stuck at a choke point, because that's exactly what it becomes. It's like a choke point to have to take those roads, and only those roads, because you can't drive heavy armor through the marsh. It'll get stuck. So they've been blessed with fairly defensible terrain, and then of course they have the extremely wide Dnieper River running down like the middle eastern part of that country. So they are trying to get them to commit all their resources to the east, the whole Donbass area, and of course Kherson, which is ideal because of where it sits in the direct south near Crimea. Now, if they can get them to commit immense amount of forces to the far south, then they cannot be redeployed once they're committed into battle against those defense lines they created in the Kherson area. Once they commit their resources there, they cannot be quickly redeployed to try to block the entry in the north over the Pripyat marshes. Now, I've explained all that before, and I even used visuals to show how that works. But they're getting ready. They're getting ready to finish that place off. They really are, and they're now at a stage where they're about to do. Well, they basically have already started, I should say, but where they're conducting a more widened air campaign, because they're doing like what we did to Iraq in the first Gulf War, using more of their air power as well as missiles to hit convoys of proxy vehicles, to hit any and all foreign equipment and mercenaries that they can find. They're making it extremely hard, extremely difficult for the proxy to continue to conduct a war. And it's already been a war of attrition. You're gonna have generals studying this stuff forever because of how Russia was able to send in a very small force that was outnumbered within the borders of that country by about 10 times, because when this whole thing began, the Ukrainians had about 650,000 forces between their regular military, their active military, their paramilitary, and their current reserves. That was the size of the forces that they had when this thing began. And Russia sent in their 70 combat battalions of either 63 to 65,000 troops, going by average Russian battalion sizes, and they were outnumbered. The Russians were, by a factor of 10 to 1. And for 7 months, they conducted a hell of a feat. It is a hell of a feat to be outnumbered that badly, but still be able to grind down because of how effective that was. Now, they have to finish them off because you cannot have a hostile nation sitting right next to you that you were just fighting. You cannot have a hostile nation. You cannot freeze a conflict. You have to continue because it's not going to be over until somebody gives up. And the somebody that gives up it's not going to be Russia. It's not going to be them. They just built up 300,000 forces. Some people say it's more. I'm just going to say the 300,000 because that's all I know of that I can actually say for a certainty, because that's the numbers that have been released publicly that they're building up. That is about 6 combined arms armies, which a combined arms army is between 50 and 55,000 troops on average. So that's about 6 combined arms armies. So that's the largest type of formation in the Russian army, sort of like in China they have their group armies, and in the West they just have armies. That's the largest size of a formation that you can have as a group or a combined arms army in the Russian armed forces. So they put about 6 of their combined arms armies up there in Belarus and Belgorod, because that's all to the north of that country where they can sweep down and into it when the time is right. And it's now coming to a point where they are conducting their preliminary air and missile strikes on actual places where troops are concentrating, where they're bringing in logistics and supplies. They're trying to hit all that stuff so that it makes them easier to defeat, when they actually go in there on the ground. They've been doing it the whole time, but they're still hitting air defense sites, logistics sites, troop concentration areas, like barracks and warehouse buildings for the logistics and supply. They're hitting all that stuff. They're hitting convoys even of enemy troops. The Russians are now with their air forces and missile strikes. They're getting ready to go in there. It's the sickles that we found out in the open. We hit their supply warehouses. We hit their air defense sites. We hit their communications and their grid. We did all of that. And that's what Russia's been doing since this weekend. So very soon, they are going to go in there. You don't do all that stuff unless you're planning to go in full bore. Full bore. So because this has been going on way too long, and it's time for it to end, because a lot of good people are dying in a conflict that's a proxy conflict, and it needs to basically be brought to a close. This is really a conflict between the Eastern and Western elites, and that brings me to the other thing I heard, which was just totally absurd. Okay, somebody, like I was saying when I introduced the video, somebody made just the kookiest claim I've ever heard. They said that Henry Kissinger runs China. Absurd. The CCP was around long before Henry Kissinger even came into the world. I mean, he ain't that damn old, you know what I'm saying? And not only that, China has its own elites. It's more like this. It's more like China runs America. It's more like that. It's not the other way around. Henry Kissinger doesn't tell the CCP what to do. Now, Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State who was the one that opened up America to China. Henry Kissinger opened up America to China and made a deal with the devil when he basically carried out the détente in 1975 and signed all these agreements with the Chinese leadership, which opened us up to then be infiltrated and all on the pretense that, oh, China's going to westernize. They're going to become like the West, and they're going to join our Western bloc. Nope. Wrong. Fail. Wrong. Fail. They are the most dangerous threat to us that we've ever faced. They're more dangerous than the Soviet Union during the Cold War, because they do actually have plans to take us over and colonize us. I'm telling you, these Western elites are different from the Eastern elites. I have shown time and time again. I even made a video about it, showing all the differences. China, they're not run by any type of secret societies. They're all banned there. They're banned. They're not allowed. The CCP runs China. They have since they took over the place. The Western puppets, like the Chinese nationalists that are now in Taiwan, those are the ones that are likely run by the West. But the CCP, it's not a wind-up toy for nobody. They're their own entity. They've been around, really officially since the 1920s. But they took over the place in 49. In 49. We had nothing to do with that. We had absolutely nothing to do with that, other than the fact that maybe that occurred because we didn't back the nationalists or make them strong enough to withstand the CCP, the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. We didn't arm them and equip them adequately or give them the support that they needed to defeat the CCP in the Chinese Civil War. That's the only role that we might have had anything to do with. We didn't back our allies, the Chinese nationalists, like we probably should have if we wanted to have any sort of leverage over China. But because the CCP took over China, they have their own ruling elites. And their elites have actually undercut the Western elites to take over their own puppets from them by their intelligence agency, the Ministry for State Security, catching a lot of these people and threatening to ruin them unless they made pro-CCP policies. It's the other way around. China, more and more, is running the West because they're taking over through stealth, through cunning. We don't have any say over China. And whatever these protests going on are, I have two words: Tiananmen Square. If they get bad enough, China's not going to play games. Interestingly enough, you can own a firearm in China, but it's only either for ceremony or for hunting. So there are people in China who have firearms, but the process to go through to get those firearms is so damn stringent and so over the top that compared to the size of their whole population, we're only talking a few million people that have firearms in China. But that's not enough to make any sort of real impact when you have the most powerful military and paramilitary on the face of the earth, and the largest. Because China, their regular military is 4 million personnel. Their reserves, their regular reserves for their military are 5 million. There's your 9 million. Then you got a 20 million man paramilitary force. So you have almost 30 million under arms in China. Yeah, I'm sure they're not worried about protests. They already destroyed protests in the 80s. In Tiananmen Square in 89. They destroyed those protests. If it gets bad enough, they'll just destroy it again. Because their people are not adequately armed to protect themselves. Because for hunting in China, we're talking like they have access to bolt action or basically lever action firearms. They don't have semi-automatic rifles that the civilians can own in China. They either have muskets, they have lever action, or they have bolt action for hunting, but the muskets are for their ceremonial arts and things like that, where they, do all the old Chinese dancing and, with the old Chinese music, or they have their festivals, You have people with muskets because, of course, gunpowder and fireworks originated in China. They originated in China. So they have a long history of tradition with gunpowder, also with muskets. But China would simply just crush the protests if they get that out of hand. I think that the West is grasping at straws when it comes to a lot of different things. If you understand your Bible, then you already know how things end. China and Russia are two of the 10 kings of Revelation who give their power to the beast. Now, this would be after they have victory in World War III, because something cataclysmic, beyond destructive, there has to be a word for it that is even worse than the word destruction and total devastation, because this has to be a cataclysm so terrible that it would make the whole world unite together as one entity. Because we don't hear any more about the West beyond, once Babylon's gone, we don't hear any more about West. It's over. So it has to be something that's so beyond destructive and deadly, devastating, cataclysmic, that it makes the whole world unite together. And only a third world war could achieve something like that, to where you get the results of the 10 kings of Revelation uniting and giving their power to the beast. Because think about it, these kings were already united in World War III. After they have a victory in World War III, since they're already united as allies in that war, it would only make sense that they come together once the war's over and they give their power to the man of sin, the beast. He'll make promises. He'll say, give me all your power. I can fix the world. I know it's been destroyed by World War III, but, I have the answers. I can fix it all. Just give me your power. The dragon gave his power unto the beast. Who is like the beast and who can make war with him? In the spiritual sense, the dragon is China, but in the physical layer of a layered prophecy, the dragon is China. That is the dragon nation. China. They have the world's biggest gold holdings. So financially, they're the top superpower. Financially, because look, the value of gold is already extremely suppressed. It's extremely suppressed. If you're going off of the suppressed value of gold, they have several trillion in gold and we're talking about in suppressed gold values. It's about 1/5 of what it's really actually worth. And I'm talking about gold. Gold is 1/5 of its real value right now because it's being artificially suppressed by paper. And China already has trillions in suppressed gold value. Now, if we're going by the true value of gold, the amount of gold China has is about between 14 and 15 trillion. It's like somewhere in there. It's somewhere in there. If you're going by the true value of it, it's between 14 and 15 trillion. It's like 14 something trillion. I did this math on a calculator the other night because I simply took the amount of gold that they have admitted to having, and like I've mentioned before, many think that the gold they have is actually much more than 6,400 tons, which is insane. That is an insane amount of gold. Humongous. There are people that believe that they have a lot more than that, upwards of 10,000 tons of gold. But let's just go with the official numbers that they've admitted to having, and we're going to say that that's about a little over. It's about almost 3 trillion. So they have several trillion in gold. We'll just round up a little bit to make that easier. So they have like 3 trillion in gold, all right? So if you take that and you multiply that by 5, you get pretty close to about 15. But remember, I'm rounding up, so it's between 14 and 15. But we'll just say it's 15. We'll round the answer up too to 15. $15 trillion in gold. In gold, and that's just gold. We're not talking other precious metals that they've accumulated as well. But they're the biggest gold holding nation. If they were even to partially back their currency with gold, their currency would be worth more than any other currency on the face of the earth if they went to gold-backed money. But they don't even have to back their money with gold because they're doing a petro-yuan renminbi. They're doing a petro-yuan renminbi, meaning that they're finalizing their deals with Saudi. They've already made deals with the rest of OPEC. They've already made their deals with Russia, with Iran, which both of those nations are close Chinese allies. They're finishing up their deals with Mohammed bin Salman, the leader now of Saudi, the official leader of Saudi. So they're bringing OPEC into the fold to do their petro, and it'll be a digital yuan as well. They're going to make their own digital money. But the digital money that America creates will be a flop because we have nothing to back it with. It'll be every bit as worthless as our paper money is now. They can't just arbitrarily assign a new value to the digital money that they're trying to make here. They can't just artificially assign new value to it. So it'll be a flop, a big flop, just like it was in my civil conflict documentary. My second American Syrian-style civil conflict documentary in my playlists. Only the regime areas used digital money, and they could almost hardly use it because they had a lot of power outages. So that made it almost impossible for them to use digital money because during a power outage, you ain't gonna have no digital nothing working. No digital anything is going to work during a power outage. Nothing. So it was a flop, especially during the Second American Civil Conflict. That's why you saw all these other systems cropping up. Other systems cropped up, whereby you've seen people using precious metals or going back to old school markets like back in ancient times or medieval times where people would produce things and bring their goods to market and trade with each other. I mean, you saw all kinds of systems crop up in the different areas that these different factions controlled. Now, America, see, China has 40% of the entire world's industrial base. They actually produce things. Like I said in my last live stream that almost nobody watched for whatever reason, I mean, it got like 100 something. Like, that's crazy. They must have really not liked what I had to say in that one, because that's really strange. But anyway, like I said in my last one, China has actually produces goods, and Russia has commodities. We're moving into a world where your nation is only as wealthy as the goods, commodities, and services it can actually produce. That's the world we're moving to. We're moving away from a fiat world, a world of fiat currencies. We're moving away from a world of paper into a world where you're only as wealthy, as valuable as the goods, commodities, or services that you can produce. In fact, that was an economic theory actually pushed heavily by Putin many, many years ago, and now it's coming to fruition, because what do we see today? We see all the sanctions backfired on the West, while we watch China and Russia economically and financially actually doing quite well, while we are falling apart in the West. That's a fact. So the sanctions boomeranged. I made a video too called The Boomeranging Effects of Globalism. That was a pretty good one. But globalism has backfired on us horribly, because China built themselves up into the dominant world superpower, because not only are they the financial superpower, they're the economic and industrial superpower with 40% of the entire world's industry in just China. And they now have the biggest military industrial complex on the face of the earth. They now have had the biggest military industrial complex on earth for the past 5 years. For the past 5 years. Now they can produce phenomenally insane amounts of military goods because they have added all these additional factories to what they already had, because China was already fairly industrialized. But since the end of the 90s, like I've said before, they started building these immense factory complexes to add to what they already had. Hundreds of them. So now that they have over 500 massive military production facilities, plus 1,200 shipyards, any of which can produce military ships, nobody can compete with that. Nobody can compete with that, realistically. And yes, China is still the world's superpower, even with the third biggest nuclear arsenal. Because all of their nukes are newer, they all work, and their fractional orbital bombardment systems have been tested a couple different times, and those work. They work. They also, see, they went from hypersonics, and they already have about 4 designs of hypersonic weapons. They went from hypersonics to fractional orbital bombardment. Plus, they're probably on their 5th design of regular hypersonics, because fractional orbital bombardment takes hypersonics a step further, because it circumnavigates the whole world before detaching a hypersonic glide vehicle for the terminal phase of the attack. That is like some crazy capabilities. They can cloak their missiles with IR paint. They can cloak them from view with the same type of technology that they use to make those stealth suits with, those mirrored stealth suits. China's nuclear capabilities are phenomenal. The capabilities. Now, the size of their arsenal, realistically, is 1,000 nukes. And why is that? Because they have had, once again, 22 tons of weapons-grade uranium, and between 2 and 4 tons of plutonium. And also, you add that to all of the silos that they have added now in Xinjiang in Western China to what they've already had in Manchuria and Inner Mongolia. Not Mongolia, Inner Mongolia. It's a Chinese province, region. They have all of these, and they also have road and rail mobile systems. So it's easy to ascertain they're realistically, because they're a nuke arsenal, the numbers are a state secret now, but it's easy to ascertain that not only is the fissile material enough to have 1,200, I'm going with the high median of 1,000. That's the most reasonable. Because, of course, they're not going to use every last little bit, like every last little shred of their fissile material to make 1,200 nukes. So let's just go with the high median, which is reasonable with the numbers of silos they've added, and how many warheads each missile can carry. It's the most reasonable estimate to say it's about 1,000. So that's what I go with. That's the third biggest arsenal on the face of the earth, but it's still enough. It's still enough to destroy two humongous nations. 500 warheads per nation, the size of the United States, or you could say Russia, because of the way their population is distributed throughout Russia. They would never do that to Russia because they're best friends. But what I'm saying is that their arsenal is enough to destroy two large nations, two massive nations, the size of ours. And the only reason I would say Russia's, again, is because of how their population's distributed. It's not as spread out as our population is. It's actually more confined. It's actually more confined to certain, like the southern part of Russia towards the Caucasus, the western parts of Russia. Very little of it lives in the Arctic Circle. The rest of it that's in Siberia is mostly in the southern parts of Siberia. So the way their population's distributed, 500 nukes would be enough to destroy them too. But of course, like I said, China would never do that to Russia because they're best friends. But 500 is enough to destroy the United States too. It's really all it would take for us to never really be able to get back up from that. We would never be like we once were, as far as being built up and, all that stuff. But what I'm saying is that China is still the world superpower, the number one superpower, because I mentioned all the reasons why. They, in real GDP, real numbers, their GDP is massively larger than ours. Our GDP, meanwhile, has shrunk by a whole third back in 2020. And now, realistically, as shitty as we're doing, it's probably at half. Realistically, it's most likely at half of what it was at one time, what it was in 2019. I even put a chart of the real GDP numbers up as a thumbnail on one of my videos way back. China had already surpassed us in real GDP back in 2019. They were already ahead of us by a few trillion. So, in real numbers, and this is before the events of 2020 happened, to where our GDP shrank by a whole third, not to mention by 2022, it's now likely shrunk to much less, to about half. Half GDP would put us at, from where we once were, it would put us at close to 10 trillion. 10 trillion. So we're getting down into like Japan territory. Japan is a little less than 10 trillion, but what I'm saying is we're getting down in that territory. In real numbers, real terms, we have shrunk immensely. We are nothing like we once were. China's technology has advanced by leaps and bounds. And China is so insidious, the CCP rather, not the people so much of China, I'm talking about the CCP, is so insidious that it is infiltrated, subverted, and stolen from all of our academic institutions, our businesses. They now sit on every corporate board of every major multinational corporation, making pro-CCP policies. Why do you think I'm so heavily shadow banned on the tubes? Because they hate me and what I have to say. They hate me with a passion. They hate me with a passion. They don't want people to hear what I'm saying. But it's all true. It's all true. That's why they don't want people hearing it. You don't get shadow banned because you're talking bullshit. You get to grow if you're talking bullshit. No, because I'm right over the target, as the saying goes. That means that they don't want people knowing what I'm trying to explain to people. So, a lot of lies and a lot of bullshit are being perpetrated out there all the time. All the time. All the time. You have to be really careful what you're listening to. Really, really careful. That's why I always tell people to learn your facts and figures, your history, everything you can, independently, because the schools teach a revised history, but you can go do real history research on your own, all on your own. Learn facts, figures, capabilities, history. Learn all of that on your own, and nobody can ever pull the wool over your eyes. Nobody can pull the wool over your eyes if you learn all these things on your own. Now, I haven't greeted everybody in here, so let me say hi to everybody. Oh, hey, Rebecca and Lady M and Miriam and who else? Perilous X Prep and whoever else is in here. It won't let me go back any further. Welcome, everybody. Well, oh, okay. There's DRD9 and, well, DRD9, my thoughts on that is, I'm not going to be like, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe that, DRD9. It didn't resonate with me. It doesn't. I'm really careful. I'll just put it this way. Anybody who believes in the pre-trib, be really careful. Use your discernment. Use your discernment. None of that person's videos really resonate with me. But as far as the man who shared them, him and I are great friends. Ken is awesome. Ken is really awesome. He has an excellent channel. Excellent. I love Ken's channel. And Ken is a really good stand-up dude. Ken's one of the most trustworthy, best friends I think I've got on the net. And also Rebecca and a handful of others like Alan over at AURA and Snaps, so Snafu Snaps. He's great too. He's a good dude. And LCJC. and Aaron James. I got a handful of really good friends on here. But Ken is great, but certain things I'm going to say that are shared don't resonate whatsoever. And I'm just saying you got to be careful because a lot of the people that that are on the tubes anymore are just saying some crazy stuff. It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense. I just be careful of anybody who believes in the pre-trib and all these other weird doctrines is all I can say. That's all I can say. Just to answer your question, like I said, my friend is awesome, but that particular video, it didn't resonate with me. The one that got shared from that person. So that individual that said that about PH, about Pearl, Pearl Harbor. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all, because when it happens, it's going to be a lot bigger than just one place, and it's not time for that yet, because remember, we go off what the word says, and the word says that we have to have a collapse, a famine, and we have to have a civil conflict. That has to happen first before we get invaded. It's going to be a lot bigger than Pearl Harbor when it happens. It's going to be a lot bigger than Pearl Harbor was. It's going to be a nationwide invasion by massive armies, just like Jeremiah 50 and 51 explains. But Jeremiah 50 and 51 also tell us that we have to have a collapse. A famine is a collapse for all intents and purposes. That pretty well defines a collapse, an economic, financial, food, fuel collapse. Famine pretty much defines it. But we also have to have a civil conflict. Depending on the translation you read, it says violence or conflict will erupt in the land between various leaders, plural leaders, like factions, like factional leaders. Violence or conflict will erupt in the land amongst different leaders, plural. That's before we get invaded by these massive, enormous foreign armies. And of course, there will be a limited amount of nukes interspersed between the conventional armies that come in and invade us. They're going to nuke some places, sure, but it's not going to be like a full-scale nuke conflict. It's going to be a conflict where they invade us for all our resources. They're not going to destroy their own troops because they have their Trojan horse shock armies embedded inside of our country. They're not going to nuke all their own troops. They're not going to do a full-scale nuke war. It's never going to happen like that. Never. It's going to be a limited use of nukes with massive conventional armies. Massive conventional armies. Besides that, they've got a lot of other technologies that basically make the need for nukes, less and less relevant. Nukes are not like the be-all, end-all anymore. You can do a lot with these new technologies like directed energy weapons. You don't even need to nuke somebody when you can shut down their whole grid and communications network. Why? You don't need to destroy their whole country. By the time you've taken out all of their communications, their grid, everything else, you basically got a free hand to go in there and whoop ass and take names, because here's the thing, without communications, you cannot organize. You cannot coordinate. You cannot do anything. You won't even know where your enemy is, what they're doing, how many of them there are, what they're coming at you with. You won't even know where they're coming from when all your communications and ability to know what's going on are totally, completely gone. They're just going to come in there and whoop your ass. And any type of reactionary idiots who haven't planned or coordinated, or they're all by themselves, you're not going to last a minute. And I can tell you that from experience. If you're trying to be like a one-man show you're going to run out there with your rifle. A lot of people, they're into shotguns and all this, and they think a shotgun is going to be some kind of a combat weapon. No, you need a rifle. But even so, even with a rifle, you can only do so much. Your rifle is not going to be able to penetrate armored vehicles, because they're not just going to come with one armored vehicle. No, they're going to come with a whole shit ton of vehicles who attack together as a unit, a whole unit. Because it's like a phalanx concept with armies, with modern armies. You know how in the ancient times the Romans did their phalanx where they were protected on all sides, even above, from arrows? Well, it's a similar thing in modern times because units attack together and they watch each other's backs by watching different sectors. Like 360-degree security in vehicle convoys as well as between foot soldiers. There's not one direction you can really come and attack them from where you're going to get the drop on them. They're going to see you pretty quickly, identify you, and then wipe you out. If you're just one person. That's why people have to be able to organize, communicate, coordinate, because, people that are just trying to do things on their own are going to get wiped out immediately, being reactionary. They're just reactionary. They think they're going to run out to their... Bubba's going to run out to his mailbox with a shotgun and fight the Chi-Com army. It doesn't work like that. You're going to get blown away pretty damn quick. You know, it don't work like that, especially with no body armor. So many people have like no protection. It'll be easy to wipe out a lot of people when we get invaded. They're going to wipe people out pretty quick. Even in the internal conflict, a lot of people are going to already be wiped out because they don't have adequate protection. Modern body armor has increased protection so much. People don't even understand that. Like modern body armor, if they would have had modern body armor back in Vietnam, not the flak jackets, I mean like the body armor of today with, you know, that was like it's got like the sappy plates, like the ceramic or steel sappy inserts like they have today. You know, like I'm talking like level 3 body armor where they can insert the sappy plates, the ceramic or metal sappy plates, the steel sappy plates. Like I've got steel in mine. If that existed today, the type of body armor today existed back in Vietnam, rather, I should say, protection would have been a lot better and a lot more people would have survived Vietnam than actually did. You know, we wouldn't have had as high casualties as we had during Vietnam. So a lot of people back in Vietnam got shot up pretty bad. We lost like almost 60,000 people, 60,000 dead in Vietnam. And now in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's under like 8,000 when you combine both conflicts. That's not all the injured. Of course, you had a shit ton of injured people from Iraq and Afghanistan. But what I'm saying, like I'm one of them. I've got a bad brain injury. A really bad brain injury causes my speech to slur sometimes. It causes me to have issues when I walk, causes me to forget certain things. Sometimes it causes me to like my thoughts to become scattered and things like that. It's hard to focus sometimes, but even so, I do the best I can with what I've got, you know, but I'm saying, had all the stuff that exists today existed back in Vietnam, as far as like military equipment, a lot of people would have survived that didn't survive. Now, you take that lesson and apply it today. When the foreign armies come in, many Americans who have firearms do not have any type of body armor or helmets to protect their heads from shrapnel or rounds that have been fired from really far away. Like, you know, we're talking like rounds that have been fired from like, I don't know, maybe like 800 meters away, or, you know, that like, you know what I'm talking about, like those 7.62 by 54 rounds that can fly that far, or maybe like a 7.62 round that's been fired from 400 meters away. By the time it gets to your head, that helmet should actually be able to protect you from it. But you know, it just all depends what helmet you have too. You know, some Kevlar helmets are better than others, you know. But the body armor will protect your vital organs from all kinds of rifle ammunition. I mean, if you get the right type of sappy plates and inserts, if you get the really good steel kinds, you know, I mean, those will protect you. I've seen magazine after magazine of both 5.56 and 7.62 by 39 get dumped into those steel plates. And they barely did anything to it. Very, very tiny scratches on it, if anything. I've seen those demonstrated. I'm glad I got those. Larger rounds like the 7.62 by 51 NATO or the Russian 7.62 by 54 / Chinese, because China manufactures those for their general purpose machine guns. Those are popular, the 7.62 by 54s. Just like the NATO rounds, the 7.62 by 51 are pretty much in that similar category of ammunition. If you get hit by those things, because it's going to really crack your ribs or do some other type of damage or knock the wind out of you, knock you down, because that steel is going to reverberate on your body. It's going to vibrate. It's going to hurt. It's really going to hurt because it's going to push into you and everything. Because the velocity of that round all of a sudden stopping is simple physics. It's going to translate through that metal, and it's going to hurt the shit out of you. But but you won't die. You're not going to die, but it'll hurt you. But people don't have any type of protection like that. I mean, most people don't. The smart ones do. I mean, a lot of people have started to purchase plate carriers and body armor, but most people don't, though. I mean, most people that own firearms don't have the adequate protection that'll go with it. You know, you should always have, make sure your equipment's good too. You know, it's not just about having a firearm. You got to make sure you're able to actually withstand, direct hits with ammunition. So people should own that type of stuff. It's just common sense, But yeah, been yapping about that for a minute. But anyways, back to China real quick before I go. America has as much influence on China as, as a cat does on being an author of a book. I mean, it's absurd what some people say, but that's the Western-centric mindset. A lot of people have a Western-centric mindset. That means they think that the West is like, the dominant decider and everything. But the world is a much bigger place than one power block. The West does not have control over the East. The East is its own power block. But they're starting, they're both in competition. That much is true. But the East version and blackmail and espionage and all of that have taken firm control over many of our leaders. It's more like Henry Kissinger is controlled by the CCP, if anything, not the other way around. He's the one that opened up the détente. He's the one that made the deal with the devil, with the Chinese, with the CCP. He did that. If anything, he's probably a Chinese agent. He's controlled by them, not the other way around. That's absurd. Because the CCP predates him. But, people are saying some crazy things, and a lot of people need to learn to stay in their lanes and talk about the things that they know about instead of, talking about things that they don't know about so much. Like my friend Ken says, people should stay in, their wheelhouses, what they're good at. And I agree with him. I agree 100% with him on that. Because the person that I heard say that about Henry Kissinger, that was just absurd. It made no sense whatsoever at all. There's no evidence that shows that could even feasibly be true. Whereas evidence shows, and China has actually taken control of most of our institutions. They've taken control of a lot of our politicians, our political parasite classes. It's the other way around. China is getting their tentacles into us. It's not the other way. No, that was absurd. That was bizarre. But a quick summary of all that I've talked about. Russia's about to finish off the proxy. They're about to finish off what they started. They're already working on it. They're already doing their preliminary strikes. Not just on the infrastructure, but also on the units themselves, the areas where they import equipment and personnel for their mercenaries and such, their mercenary units, all of it. They're increasing the intensity of the battles that have been occurring in the east there in Donbass, from Kharkiv really all the way down to Kherson. That'll be the pinning action to pin down the Ukrainians' resources and personnel while they come down from the north and finish them off. Of course, they're going to continue to do their preliminary bombardments for a little bit before that happens, but once they're finished with all of that, they'll come riding in there and finish that whole thing off. It'll be pretty soon. It sure looks that way because they're doing a lot of things that look like what a nation does before it invades another nation. They're doing all the same things. So it looks like they're about to finish this thing fairly soon, too. Fairly soon. How many days, I can't say, but it'll be pretty damn soon. If they keep going at the rate they're going. And I also discussed China and all the absurd things people say about China, whereas I compared it to actual facts, figures, capabilities, statistics, reality. And then I also discussed how we have to have an internal conflict and a collapse before we get invaded by foreign nations, by China and their whole coalition. Well, China, Russia, and their other little buddies that share their values, who want to help destroy this place. Before we get invaded by that coalition, we have to have an internal conflict, and before that even happens, we have to have a collapse, a food, fuel, economic, and financial collapse. Everything has to collapse. So, yeah, we're not going to get attacked by foreign nations until that other stuff has occurred, which as of right now, as I'm speaking these words right now, what day is today? As of Monday, November 27th? No, 28th. I'm sorry. As of Monday, the 28th, we have not collapsed completely yet. So that has to happen first. But I truly feel like that is in the cards pretty soon. Like the currency is going to collapse here real soon. I have that feeling. I just feel like it's going to happen. You know, it feels like it's imminent. And then after that, then we're going to have an internal conflict sometime after we collapse. Sometime after. I don't know how it'll all be spaced, but it seems to be the case. And then we have a foreign invasion after we had our internal conflict. Because remember, China and Russia, they're fomenting a lot of things that are happening in the West. They're depleting the West via China cutting off trade with the West of valuable components in sneaky sorts of ways by saying that they're doing lockdowns in port areas. And also, of course, Russia, destroying much of the West's equipment and capabilities, therefore, because we don't have the industrial capacity to replace everything that we've been giving away or that was lost in Afghan. If you take everything that we have wasted between Iraq, Afghan, Syria, and now Ukraine, we have lost an immense amount of resources, immense resources and capabilities along with it. Our capabilities have waned, severely waned. We have this woke military. It's not anything anywhere near as good as our armed forces used to be about 10 years or so ago. Even 5 years ago, they were a lot better than they are today. I mean, today, it's a total joke. But 5 years ago was when we began to lose all these simulations with China. And then we also lost our NATO war games with Russia, which revealed a lot. And I've talked about all that in the past. What the NATO war games revealed about NATO's weaknesses in any type of war. One of which being that they don't have the ammo to fight a real war. They don't have the ammunition to fight a war. They only have ammo to fight little counterinsurgency conflicts. They can't fight a major power like Russia, and they cannot fight the world's superpower, which is China. Russia's the second strongest after China, overall power. They don't have the conventional forces that China has, but Russia sure has a massive nuke arsenal. And they have the second strongest conventional forces overall after China. So, there's no way NATO can hold its own against Russia, much less, especially not China, because China's the world's superpower. NATO probably couldn't even beat, Iran in a war. I mean, NATO's a joke. The West is a joke because it's castrated itself. It's going down. But I've been going about an hour, so I'm going to say my farewells. That's pretty much a summary of my video here. Hey, B-Ran. Great to see you. No, B-Ran, I don't. It's too early for that. China and Russia, you have to remember, they have very austere mindsets. Could they invade right now and kick our ass directly? Oh, yeah, absolutely they could. Absolutely they could. But you got to understand, China and Russia, once they've taken us over, they don't want to fight a massive counterinsurgency among the population. So what are they going to do? They've learned from every type of war of conquest in history. They've learned how much of a thorn in their side a counterinsurgency would be. Oh yeah, they could fight one. They could fight a counterinsurgency once they've taken us over. They could fight one for many, 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 many years. But it would be such a thorn in their side because the whole purpose of invading us is to be able to colonize us and exploit our resources immediately. Meaning they want to be able to bring in their civil assets, like their civilian assets, like economic and financial assets, to be able to strip mine this place. You know, they're going to colonize it. They want to bring in colonists and workers to be able to go immediately to strip mining this place, exploiting it, and exploiting the people of this place. And they don't want to have to fight this ginormous counterinsurgency like how I've depicted in my best case scenario where they come in headstrong, they kick our ass, then they have to fight this massive counterinsurgency. They don't want to have to do it that way. They would prefer if we have a collapse and a civil conflict first, because they're very austere-minded. They're very cheap and frugal, you know. They don't want to have to expend resources unless they know they have to. So they're going to let us collapse. They're going to let all our best people wipe each other out in a civil conflict. So that way that we don't have these massive partisan elements that rise up to fight the occupation forces. Once they've taken us over, that way they don't have to worry about fighting a counterinsurgency against a bunch of partisans who uprise. They would prefer if we eliminate our best people for them, like meaning in a civil conflict. They would prefer our best people eliminate each other for them so that when they invade, they don't have to worry about that by and large, because all of our best people won't be there to train others to be able to rise up against the occupying powers, which would be China, Russia, and their allies. They don't want to have to fight this massive counterinsurgency. They want to be able to go straight to colonization and exploitation of all the resources. So no, they're going to wait for us to collapse and have a civil conflict first. They're not going to waste all their resources, you know, to fight us now when they know that we're about to collapse. They know we're having hard times. They know we're teetering on the brink. So they're going to wait until that happens first. Then they're going to come in full bore, kick our ass, and then go straight into colonizing it, because they'll know by then how weak we are, because they won't have to worry about this massive counterinsurgency campaign they'll have to fight, because they won't have to expend the resources on it, and they can go straight into bringing their people in once they've taken over. See, that's their whole mindset. They're very austere, very cheap. You know, they don't like to expend resources or lives or anything else when they know they don't have to. When they know they don't have to. But that was a good question, B-Ran. Very good question. But no, they're not going to do that. Plus, in the Bible, it says that the aforementioned has to happen first. We have to have a collapse in a civil conflict like in Jeremiah. So we do have to have that happen first. A lot of people forget that. A lot of people forget that. I see it all the time in, you know, videos of people. They forget that we have to have a civil conflict first, according to the word, according to Jeremiah. And we have to have a collapse even before that. But oh yeah, B-Ran, they might. I mean, I'm sure they probably will. I'm sure they probably will. But keep in mind, China single-handedly could kick all of NATO's ass. I mean, they have the world's biggest, most technologically advanced navy. They have the world's biggest combat air fleet, and that's by a massive margin. A massive margin. China has 1,050 more combat aircraft than we have, and they're all 4th, 4.5, or 5th generation aircraft. And they have a lot more than we have. I mean, 1,050 more combat aircraft is an immense amount of combat planes. They're not worried about us. Plus, they have their naval combat aircraft. They have the biggest submarine fleet in the world, along with having the biggest overall navy. Their subfleet is bigger than our subfleet. They might not have as many aircraft carriers, but they don't need that. They have better and more missiles than any other nation on the face of the earth. They design special missiles that can kill carriers. Plus, their hypersonics can do it. Their coastal-based anti-ship missiles can do it. I mean, China has a lot of options. And just like submarines have been known to sink entire U.S. Carrier groups, like the French sub Saphir did in that exercise, that NATO exercise, they sank a whole American carrier group single-handedly. And that was an old-school sub. That was an old sub, too. Had that been live ammo that they were using in the drills, they would have sunk that whole carrier group single-handedly. So China, having the biggest subfleet on Earth, biggest navy anyway, that surface and subs combined, and of course they have all of these missiles. They have the most missiles of any nation on the face of the Earth. They have the biggest tank fleet on Earth. They have the biggest armored vehicle fleet, and I'm just going to say it that way because I'm talking about their infantry fighting vehicles and armor personnel carriers combined with like armored trucks and MRAPS and things like that, the armored fighting vehicles. I'm just going to say armored vehicles to cover all three of those classes. They have 60,000 armored vehicles. That's insane. We only have 20,000. So China has like 3 times as many armored fighting vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, armor personnel carriers than we have. And they have the biggest tank fleet on Earth. They have like 3 times as many tanks as we have. 3 times. Well, actually, a little more than that if you count their light tanks. If you count the light tanks, too, they have like basically 4 times as many tanks as we have because they have just over 23,000 and we have like 6,000 something now. So China would whoop our ass in a war. I mean, they would crush us. They might not have as many aircraft carriers and such, but everything else that matters, they can sink all our navy. They could sink our entire navy quick. They could sink all our carriers quick. They have everything that matters. I mean, they're not worried about us or anybody else really. China's immense. China's huge. They're not to be messed with. And their industrial base, their military and civilian industrial base is ginormous. Their military industrial base has been expanded so much. I mean, in the last 5 years, a lot of their factories had come online that they've been building for many, many years, like humongous, ginormous factory complexes. China now has the production that would be considered like World War II level production during peacetime. And they can easily retool all their automotive and bus factories to produce military vehicles if they needed the extra capacity, but they really don't because all the major factories that they've constructed that came online in the last 5 years, that's enough. It's really enough. They already outproduce us by so much. It's a crying shame. It is a crying shame. They even outproduce Russia by like 3 times too. They have like 3 times the output of tank behemoth. They're just a monster. But a lot of people don't want to see the truth because a lot of people don't do their research. They just listen to what propaganda says about our enemies, about China and Russia, but they don't do their own research into the real numbers and capabilities and statistics and everything else that favor China and Russia both over us. We've lost most of our industry. We've lost most of everything we have. We're like a paper tiger now. We have this woke military. They're poorly trained. I mean, we're like a shell of what we once used to be. We're like a regional power. We're not a superpower whatsoever at all. We're like a regional power now. We have this hollow, thinned out, woke military. We've given away key systems to Ukraine and wasted a whole bunch of other things in Afghan, Iraq, and Syria with absolutely nothing to show for it. Nothing to show for it. See, as a combat veteran of OIF, I often wonder, like, what good came out of it? What good really came out of that? All I've seen was a lot of good people die or get badly injured, for nothing. Oh, man, I was about to drop an F-bomb. I was about to say for effing nothing, too. For effing nothing, man. I had to catch myself. I'm sorry. It just makes me so livid. It makes me so angry. All we did was put money in some Western elite's pockets. We didn't do anything good for the American people, and it's a damn shame. It's a crying shame. All at the expense of people's lives and their health. It's a damn shame. That's what makes me so. But anyway, maybe take a few more questions before I go. Well, I don't have that much left. I don't have that much battery left. Otherwise, I would say I'd take a few more questions. Oh, let me see. Push all these buttons. Hey there, Aaron. I see you. And B-Ran and Rebecca and Miriam and whoever else. Let me see whoever else is in here. Oh yeah, Perilous X Prep and DRD, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to get going here. You all have a blessed day. Thank you. Thank you.